We start with the case against Iran. Saudi Arabia today presenting its evidence to the world that it says undeniably points to Iran as the sponsor of the attack on Saudi oil infrastructure. But even before that announcement, President Trump struck back, tweeting that he's ordered substantial new sanctions against Iran. Our Nick Robertson is in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And Nick, take us through these conclusions reached by Saudi Arabia. And do they know if this was carried out by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard or where exactly this came from?
Brianna, a lot of talk by the spokesman for the military here about the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, but not specifically saying that they're responsible for the launching of these attack vehicles, or specifically saying that they were launched from Iran. What they did was they went through the number of drones. 18 drones were fired, 7 different cruise missiles. 3 of the cruise missiles failed to hit their target. They had those on a stage. They had 7 of the smashed up drones on the stage. In the audience there, not just journalists, but you had ambassadors there, you had military attaches, because the Saudis are really sort of got a full court press on to bring international support. Now, I asked questions saying, how can you prove that these missiles and the cruise missiles and drones didn't come from Yemen? He was very categorical about that. He said the range just wasn't there. I said, what is it about these devices that limits that range to this point? And he said, look, we've seen these before. Iranians manufacture something very, very similar to this. It just doesn't have the range. They also showed some CCTV footage from one of the sites that was attacked. And he said specifically, you can see these cruise missiles flying from the north to the south to hit their target. He said if they fly from the north, Yemen is the opposite direction, can't be Yemen. I asked, how are you trying to find out where the point of origin, where these were fired from? He wouldn't get into that in detail, but he did say these devices carry GPS devices for tracking. Essentially, they can follow the data breadcrumbs back inside those devices to figure out where they came from. But he also said that the Iranians, even while the Saudis have got these devices in their hands and on the test bench, are trying to scrub the data remotely from these GPSs. He didn't get into detail on that. What will you do if these were launched from Iran? What will you do if it's just Iranian devices themselves? And he said that's not for him to decide. That's for the politicians. But this was the big show and tell. This was the moment this afternoon.
It's pretty stunning what they laid out there just in terms of the pieces of equipment there. Nick Robertson in Riyadh, thank you. Robin Wright's joining us now. She is a distinguished fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace and a contributing writer for The New York. So while laying out the evidence here, the Saudis said that this wasn't just an attack on Saudi Arabia. It's an attack, as they put it, on the international community and the world economy. Is Saudi Arabia correct in that distinction, Robin?
Oh, absolutely. Anything that provides so much of the world's global oil consumption is clearly reflecting the kind of the scope of this attack. It's unprecedented in the 40 years of the Iranian Revolution. It has always worked through proxies. It's engaged in kind of assaults on what it perceived enemies, whether it's Israel, U.S. forces in Iraq, even U.S. forces in Afghanistan, through allies, so that its fingerprints are on it, but not visible.
Saudi Arabia has this history of wanting the U.S. to act in its favor.
Yes.
And it has an interest in that, of course, right? So that is part of the reason why it's so important, the evidence that Saudi Arabia lays out. How should the U.S. be responding to that? And how should they be taking this information, considering that Saudi Arabia has this prevailing interest in this having come from Iran, not from Yemen?
Well, I think there are 4 different things the United States can do. One is to impose new sanctions, which the president has indicated he plans to do. There's not much that's going to have an effect, but any little bit does further cripple the Iranian economy and its ability to trade with its own oil to the outside world. It can engage in cyber attacks, which is what apparently happened in the aftermath of the Iranians shooting down the U.S. drone in June. It can go to the international community at the United Nations, which convenes next week, to ask for action. Remember, the 5 other signers to the nuclear deal in 2015, Russia, China, and the Europeans, continue to do business with Iran. They still honor the deal, and so this puts the squeeze on them. And the fourth thing is, it can support Saudi Arabia if it decides to attack, to retaliate against Iran itself.
Senator Lindsey Graham, who has called this attack an act of war, says the president's lack of response to Iran downing a U.S. drone in June was seen by Iran as, quote, a sign of weakness. Now, Trump disagreed with this. He said that was a sign of strength. Do you think that Iran's view of the U.S. response to that drone informed their calculus of this attack on oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia?
Maybe somewhat, but I think at the end of the day, the Iranians are gaming the bigger picture, and that is they feel that they're paying a price. They signed the nuclear deal. They haven't received the rewards. They're now under sanctions, feeling a squeeze. Their oil exports have gone from 3.2 million barrels a day to somewhere around 300,000. And it's trying to signal to the United States and to the world, if you really cut off our economy, if you make us pay a price, if you corner us, there will be a price. And I think we've seen that, whether it's the attacks on the tankers, the shooting down of the U.S. drones. There's been a pattern here over the last 3 or 4 months that changes its visibility and how bold it's going to be in showing that it will strike, not just through its proxies.
All right, Robin Wright, thank you so much for your expertise in this. Washington.